We are deep in the competent action games that nobody cares about because of when they were released weeds now. Jigoku Gokurakumaru is a game that's really obscure on both sides of the Pacific. But it's still a pretty well done action game. It was developed by HAL after all, the first of 3 games that they developed that will be released in this holiday season. Yes, that does mean that HAL had 3 games released in 1 week. A loose translation of the Japanese title could be The Circle of Heaven and Hell, which is really poetic, but doesn't have anything to do with the actual game. Instead, it points to the fact that this is very technically a movie tie-in. The samurai film Zipeng, which actually got a PC Engine game that was a sequel to Solomon's Key, is about an infamous bandit named Jigoku Gokurakumaru. And the main character of Jigoku Gokurakumaru is 15-year-old Bobby Yano, a name that even Japanese players find ridiculous. He's an ancestor of Gokurakumaru. This also means that the PlayStation 2 game 7 Blades is technically a sequel to this. I'm just going to tell you right now, don't look for any connections between these 3 games. In fact, the connections between the Famicom game and the movie are really tenuous. The movie is referenced in the opening cutscene, and that is just about it. The plot of this game is that in the near future, a space station has its supercomputer about to come online, but it's taken over by a hostile outside force. The only chance to fix it is to transfer the consciousness of a 15-year-old boy into the computer, where he transforms into the likeness of his warrior ancestor and beats up the hostile programs. And that sure is some machine language that's scrolling past as you enter the game. In the computer, the A button jumps and the B button attacks. Your standing attack is to whip your hair back and forth. But if you crouch, you'll do a punch with a much shorter range. And if you're holding on to something above you, then you'll do a kick. And that clinging is the big feature of Jigoku Gokurakumaru. There's a few walls that you can stick to and climb up, but really you're looking at things that you can cling on to over your head. Some of the platforms you can swing yourself up through by hitting up and jump, but more often you're going to want to swing out to the side. There are a lot of platforming challenges in this game that require some precise timing based on this. And it takes a few moments to get your swing going, so getting the right timing to, say, dodge these flamethrowers is kind of tough. And how far you go with that jump off of items is dependent on how much you've swung, so sometimes you have to do small jumps. The jumping is also affected by your momentum. If you're on a conveyor belt, then it'll either reduce or increase your jump distance depending on which way the belt was going compared to you. There are only 2 things that enemies drop for you to pick up: health recoveries in the form of hearts, and chips, which act as weapon energy. You actually don't start out at maximum health, so you can gain health immediately. As for the chips, you can cycle through alternative weapons by pressing the select button. You get 1 of these with each boss you defeat, and of course the stronger ones cost more in chips. There is a problem with Jigoku Gokurakumaru, however, where chips are so rare that the only place you're going to want to use them is against bosses. The abilities are a small ranged shot, a larger ranged shot that can penetrate enemies, a 3-way shot, a stick of dynamite that you lob that has an explosion that stays around, and finally an energy field that bounces around back and forth in a small area. There's one other thing that you can do with chips. On bosses, if you pause the game by pressing start, hitting up and down can transfer health and chips between each other. But that's probably not something you want to do very often. There's only 5 stages here, and they're not very well themed. They have distinctive backgrounds and obstacles in each section, but they're all basically biomechanical terror zones. There are a couple of stages that stand out for being nasty, like this one where you're given no time to run through the area, but those are really the exception. The game has a nice sense of visual design, but none of it really stands out. And I also found most of the bosses to be underwhelming. The first few are basically just some guy. And then you have this enemy whose pattern is relatively easy to decipher. This boss was the most annoying as it has 2 little sub-bosses with him that shoot at you, plus hangs out on the ceiling unless you let it do a charge shot at you. If you do something foolish like get out of the way, it'll just stay up there forever. The boss of the 5th and final stage was a standout, as it's a mechanical tripod that you have to climb up and then hit when the capsule on top opens. And then the final boss is finally something suitably impressive, this giant head with arms that shoot out at you. You're given 3 lives for Jigoku Gokurakumaru, and a whopping 2 continues. If you just die, then you'll continue from the same sub-level that you were on. But if you get a game over, then it's back to the beginning of that whole level. There is a cheat code that allows you to do a level select, but once you activate it, you can select levels that don't exist. I haven't found any of those that function yet, so there doesn't seem to be a real minus world here. This is a game that seems to have had absolutely no impact in Japan. The only mentions of it I could find were people talking about its connection to the movie. Also, it tends to be a bit on the pricey side. A cartridge-only copy is generally in the neighborhood of about 6,000 yen. My take on this one is that it's a solid action game for when you've already beaten Ninja Ryukenden, but it's got some weird difficulty shifts. It switches up from being trivially easy to brutally difficult in the blink of an eye. And a lot of the enemies seem to require some pretty tight timing that I never could quite get down. Overall though, I think Jigoku Gokurakumaru is a pretty good, but not outstanding game. It's never going to stand among the best, but it's pretty far from the worst.